My boyfriend refused to sign the prenup, saying, "It's an insult." I replied, "I understand." Then I canceled the venue and called off the wedding with one public post. The next morning, his father was at my door. My name is Naomi Carter, and I'm 32 years old. Or at least, I was 32 and still naive enough to think love and good judgment always arrive together. Until 2 weeks before that dinner, I thought I was one of the lucky women. I wasn't born into money. Nobody handed me a polished future or a safety net. 5 years ago, I built my software development company from the floor of my garage, surviving on instant noodles, 4 hours of sleep, and the kind of stubbornness that starts to feel like faith when you don't have anything else. Now the company is small but solid, 15 employees, loyal clients, a reputation I fought for line by line, contract by contract, release by release. It isn't flashy, it isn't glamorous, but it's mine. And maybe that matters more to this story than the engagement ring ever did. His name was Ethan Blake. He was 29, charming in the way some men are when they've always believed rooms would soften for them. We'd been together for 3 years, engaged for 6 months, and our wedding was supposed to happen in 4 more. For most of that time, I loved him with the kind of certainty that makes you explain away things you should probably study more carefully. I thought he was warm, easy to be around, funny when I was tired, gentle when life felt heavy. I thought he was my person. That's the humiliating thing about hindsight. It doesn't just show you what you missed. It shows you how much of yourself you volunteered to the illusion. My closest friend is also my lawyer, and the moment the wedding became real enough to involve deposits, contracts, and legal paperwork, she sat across from me and said, "Naomi, you need a prenup." Not because she thought Ethan was after my money, not because she was cynical, because she knew exactly what my business was. Not just income, not just an asset on paper. It was payroll. It was my employees' mortgages, daycare payments, medical bills, and rent. It was the thing I had poured my 20s into, while other people were collecting wedding inspiration boards and honeymoon itineraries. If I ever made a reckless decision with that company, it wouldn't only hurt me, so I agreed. The prenup was fair. Painfully fair, actually. What I brought into the marriage stayed mine. What Ethan brought in stayed his. Anything we built together after the marriage would be shared equally. It protected both of us. It wasn't a trap. It wasn't a punishment. It was a boundary. I gave it to Ethan 2 weeks before the final non-refundable venue payment was due, $15,000. We had already put down 5. He took the packet from me, skimmed the first page, and gave me that reassuring half smile I had once mistaken for emotional maturity. "Of course," he said. "If it protects the business, I get it." I remember the relief that went through me. I remember thinking, see? This is what partnership looks like. Hard conversations, handled well. Now I look back at that moment and wonder whether he was buying time or just waiting until the pressure was high enough to force my hand. The deadline to sign was the night before I had to authorize the last venue payment. We were at dinner in the apartment I paid for, eating takeout that had gone lukewarm because both of us had been pretending to be normal all evening. I set down my fork and said, as calmly as I could, "Hey, I just wanted to check in about the prenup. We need to finalize it before I make the venue payment tomorrow." His entire face changed. It wasn't dramatic at first, just a small hardening around the eyes, a tension in his jaw. Then he leaned back and said, "I looked at it." I waited. "And I'm not signing it, Naomi." I kept my voice neutral. "Okay. Tell me what your concerns are. We can adjust language if something feels off. The lawyers can revise it." "My concern," he said, "is the document itself." He laughed once, but there wasn't any humor in it. "It's insulting." I stared at him. "Insulting how?" "It tells me exactly what you think of me, that I'm here for your money, that I'm some opportunist waiting for a ring and a legal claim." "That's not what it says." "That's exactly what it says." His voice sharpened with every sentence. "My parents built a life together without some cold little contract between them. They trusted each other. This?" He tapped the folder beside him. "This is what people do when they're already planning for divorce." I felt something inside me go still. Not angry, not even defensive. Still. It's not planning for divorce, I said. It's protecting premarital assets, including the company. You know what that company represents to me. His expression softened, but only on the surface, like he had decided outrage alone wasn't enough and now it was time for hurt. So what am I supposed to hear when the woman I'm about to marry asks me to sign something saying none of this is really ours? I looked at him for a long second. Because there it was. Not fear, not wounded love, possession. He wasn't reacting like a man afraid of being misjudged. He was reacting like a man blocked from reaching something he had already started to count as his. That's not what I'm saying, I said quietly. It is to me. He pushed his plate away. If we're really building a marriage, then we should be all in, fully, no exit plan, no paperwork that draws lines between us. The room felt different now, smaller, colder. I had gone into that conversation ready to compromise wording, timing, delivery, tone. But every answer he gave stripped something away, not from the prenup, from him. I said, "So this isn't about revisions. You're refusing to sign anything at all." He held my gaze. "Yes." "And if I say the wedding can't move forward without it?" His answer came too fast. "Then maybe you need to decide what matters more, me or a piece of paper." Silence opened between us. I had spent 3 years believing that when the hard part came, Ethan and I would stand on the same side of it. But in that moment, I wasn't looking at my future husband. I was looking at a man issuing an ultimatum with complete confidence that I would fold. Maybe because he thought I loved him more than I respected myself. Maybe because he thought women like me, women who work too much, carry too much, build too much alone, eventually get grateful enough to accept almost anything if someone promises to stay. He was wrong. The strange thing is, my heartbreak didn't arrive like an explosion. It arrived like the power going out in a house. 1 second, everything was lit. The next, I could see the shape of the room more clearly because the illusion was gone. I folded my hands in my lap and said, "I understand." The smile that touched his mouth was small, but I saw it. Triumph. He thought he had won. "Good," he said. "I'm glad you're being reasonable." Reasonable. I almost laughed. Instead, I stood, carried my plate to the sink, and said, "I need to answer a couple emails." He nodded like the evening had been settled, like dinner would continue, like the woman he had just cornered would now make the practical choice and move on. I walked into my office, shut the door, and stood there for a few seconds with both hands braced against my desk. Then I started making calls. First, the venue. I canceled and lost the $5,000 deposit. Then the caterer. Then the photographer. Then the band. Each cancellation felt less like destruction and more like removing bricks from a wall that had nearly been built around me. When that was done, I opened the wedding website and the event page and posted one short message. Due to unforeseen circumstances, the wedding of Naomi Carter and Ethan Blake, scheduled for October 12th, has been canceled. I apologize for any inconvenience to our guests and wish Ethan all the best. That was it. No accusation, no scene, no explanation. Just the truth, stripped down to its bones. After that, I packed an overnight bag, a few clothes, my laptop, charger, toiletries. The essentials you grab when the shape of your life has changed too suddenly for your emotions to catch up. I didn't tell him where I was going. I didn't wait for him to read the post. I left the apartment, checked into a hotel across town, and turned off my phone. For the first time all night, I let myself sit on the edge of the bed and feel what had actually happened. Not just that the wedding was over, not just that my engagement had collapsed in less than an hour, but that the man I had planned to marry had looked at the life I built and seen access. I must have fallen asleep sometime before dawn, because the next thing I remember was waking to the room phone ringing and a pounding on my hotel door that sounded urgent enough to be an emergency. My own phone, once I turned it on, lit up so violently with missed calls and messages that it looked possessed. Texts from Ethan, voicemails from Ethan, unknown numbers. Then the front desk clerk came through the line, voice thin with nerves. "Ms. Carter? I'm so sorry to disturb you, but there's a man in the lobby demanding to see you. He says his name is Victor Blake. He's making quite a scene." Ethan's father. And somehow, not even 12 hours after I walked away, he had already come to collect. I went downstairs because I refused to let Ethan's father turn a hotel lobby into a stage, and me into the unstable woman his son was probably already describing to people. The coffee shop off the lobby was nearly empty, which made him stand out even more. Victor Blake had the kind of presence that depended on other people shrinking a little when he walked in. Expensive coat, silver at his temples, the polished confidence of a man used to closing deals and ending conversations on his terms. He was sitting at a corner table, but not calmly. His posture had that restless aggression of someone who felt insulted by the fact that he had been made to wait at all. When he saw me, he stood immediately. There she is, no hello, no courtesy, no attempt to pretend this was a civil conversation. I stayed standing for a second longer than necessary, then pulled out the chair across from him and sat down. You have 5 minutes. His mouth tightened. So that's how this is going to be? I folded my hands on the table. You came to my hotel uninvited and caused a scene in the lobby before 9 in the morning. I'm not especially worried about whether this feels warm. His eyes flashed. For a second, I saw exactly where Ethan got that look from, that offended disbelief people wear when the world fails to obey the version they had already written in their heads. You humiliated my son, he said. There it was. Not concern, not confusion, not a question. An accusation delivered like a verdict. I kept my voice even. Ethan made a choice. I responded to it. Victor leaned forward. A choice? Don't insult my intelligence. You cornered him with a legal document that treated him like a criminal, and when he had an emotional reaction, you detonated the wedding in public. He had the document for 2 weeks. He was hurt. He gave me an ultimatum. That landed harder than I expected, not because Victor believed me, but because he understood instantly how bad that sounded when reduced to one clean sentence. He recovered quickly. You're both adults, engaged adults. People say things in the heat of the moment. He repeated himself very clearly. Victor stared at me, recalculating. The anger in him didn't disappear. It just changed clothes. His tone dropped into something smoother, more deliberate. Naomi, let me give you some advice. You are making a very emotional decision and turning it into a permanent public disaster. I almost smiled at that, because that was the line, wasn't it? If a woman stayed calm while dismantling a bad arrangement, then suddenly she was cold. If she reacted emotionally, she was unstable. They always left themselves a way to discredit her. I made a practical decision, I said. The wedding could not move forward. Then you cancel it privately, he snapped. You don't post it for everyone to see like some vindictive teenager. The website existed to inform the guests. He exhaled sharply through his nose, then shifted again. Listen to me. Call everyone back. Tell them the two of you had a fight, a misunderstanding. Say the stress got to you. People understand that. They'll accept it. The air seemed to thin around the table, because in that moment I understood with perfect clarity what mattered to him, not whether the marriage was healthy, not whether his son had just revealed something ugly about himself, not even whether I had been hurt. What mattered was narrative control, contain the embarrassment, patch the optics, put the woman back where she belongs, smiling beside the man so the family can continue uninterrupted. I said, no. Victor blinked once. Excuse me? The relationship is over. I'm not calling anyone back. His jaw hardened. Do you have any idea how this reflects on Ethan? Yes, I said. I imagine he's unhappy with the reflection. That made him sit back. For the first time since I arrived, something openly hostile moved across his face. You think you're teaching him a lesson? No, I think I'm refusing to marry someone who tried to force me into a decision by cornering me. He looked at me for a long moment, and when he spoke again, the civility was gone completely. You're a smart woman, Naomi. Don't become a foolish one. There it was, the warning dressed as advice. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I looked at him, really looked at him. At the expensive watch on his wrist, the cufflinks, the clean nails, the posture of a man who had spent years learning that threats work better when they sound disappointed instead of violent. Then I said very quietly, Are you threatening me? His expression didn't shift, but his eyes did. Tiny movement, tiny pause. No, he said. I'm telling you that there are consequences when you make enemies unnecessarily. I stood. The good news, I said, picking up my bag, is that I didn't make an enemy unnecessarily. His voice followed me before I could step away from the table. Fix this, Naomi. I turned back once. It's already fixed. Then I walked out and left him sitting there with his coffee untouched and his authority suddenly less useful than he was used to. Back in my room, I locked the door and leaned against it for a second. My hands weren't shaking. That frightened me more than if they had been. There is a particular kind of exhaustion that comes when your private heartbreak gets absorbed into a larger machine. The night before, I had ended an engagement. By morning, I understood I had also triggered a family's defense system. I showered, I changed, I answered exactly 3 work emails. Then I finally let myself look through the messages that had stacked up overnight. Ethan had texted me 21 times. At first, the messages were frantic. What the hell did you do? Take that down. You seriously posted that before even talking to me? Call me now. Then indignant. My mother is crying. My dad is furious. Do you have any idea how humiliating this is? You're making me look insane. And then, eventually, injured. I loved you. I can't believe you would do this to us. You didn't even try to fight for us. That last one sat on the screen longer than the others. Not because it hurt most, because it was such a clean little inversion. As if me refusing his ultimatum meant I was the one who didn't fight. As if protecting the life I built was a failure of devotion. As if love was only real when it asked the woman to surrender first. I didn't answer. I also didn't answer the messages from his mother, Diane Blake, which were somehow worse, because they were wrapped in the language of wounded maternal decency. I always treated you like family. I never imagined you could be this cruel. Ethan is devastated. You've made a private disagreement public and humiliating. A private disagreement. That phrase nearly made me laugh out loud. A private disagreement was where to spend Thanksgiving, whether we wanted a small wedding or a large one, whether to get a dog this year or next. A man telling me to choose between marrying him unprotected or losing him entirely was not a private disagreement. It was a reveal. By noon, mutual friends had started reaching out. Some were cautious, some were nosy. Some were trying so hard to sound neutral that it only made their discomfort louder. I ignored most of them. But by the 3rd day, something changed. Not in me. In the story moving around me. It started subtly, the way social damage usually does. A friend of Ethan's sent a strangely careful message asking if I was doing okay, and whether I was under too much pressure with the company lately. Another mutual acquaintance said Ethan was worried about how hard I'd been pushing myself. Someone else implied the cancellation had happened because I had spiraled. I stared at those messages and felt cold all over, because that was the strategy, not to call me vindictive, not directly. That would invite too many questions. No, this was cleaner. I was overwhelmed, stressed, unwell, acting out of character. The wedding hadn't ended because Ethan refused a fair legal agreement. It had ended because poor Naomi had let work consume her until she broke. It was subtle enough to spread, soft enough to sound compassionate, cruel enough to stick. And suddenly I understood why Victor had looked so calm when threats entered the room. Men like him didn't always need to smash something to ruin it. Sometimes they just breathed near the water until everyone agreed it looked cloudy. By the end of the week, I made the next decision I had been dreading. Ethan had to move out. The apartment was in my name. The lease was mine. I paid for it. He had lived there with me, yes, but he was not on the contract, and whatever guilt he hoped to weaponize against me didn't change the legal reality. I asked my lawyer to draft the notice. Formal, clean, no emotion. 30 days to vacate, in compliance with state tenancy requirements. I sent it by email. He called me less than 10 minutes later. I let it ring once, twice, 3 times. Then I answered. For the first few seconds, all I heard was breathing. Then his voice came through, rough and incredulous. Are you serious? Yes. You're throwing me out? I'm asking you to move out of an apartment that is legally mine. His laugh was short and disbelieving. Wow. I said nothing. Wow, he repeated. So that's who you are now. No, I said. That's who I've had to become now. He went quiet for a beat, and when he spoke again, his voice had changed. Softer, hurt, carefully human. Naomi, I have nowhere else lined up. I'm barely sleeping. I can't even think straight right now. I closed my eyes for 1 second. This was the version of him that had once worked on me. The version that made every boundary feel like cruelty and every act of self-protection feel like abandonment. But now that I had seen the other side of him, I could hear the mechanics inside it. "I'm sorry you're upset," I said. "The 30 days stand." "You're unbelievable." No, I was trusting. That's different. He inhaled sharply. "You're really doing this?" "Yes." When I hung up, I sat at my desk and stared at nothing for almost a full minute. Not because I was uncertain, because certainty can be its own kind of grief. Diane texted me an hour later. "You know he has nowhere to go. Have you completely lost your heart?" I typed 3 words. The notice stands. Then I put my phone face down and went back to work, though work had become something else entirely now. Not just deadlines and client calls and payroll spreadsheets, but performance, composure, survival in a blazer. The next week, the first business tremor hit. One of my long-term software suppliers suddenly informed us they were tightening our credit line due to market concerns. The account manager sounded embarrassed, almost apologetic, but firm enough to make clear the decision was already made. 2 days later, a mid-sized client paused an upcoming project and used language so vague it felt practiced. "We've heard a few concerning things. We may need to wait and see. Just until everything stabilizes." Everything stabilizes. I sat in the conference room after that call ended, staring at my own reflection in the black screen. Then I understood. Victor hadn't been bluffing in the hotel. He wasn't going to hit me in a way that left fingerprints. He was going to poison the air around me and wait for people to breathe it in. And the worst part was how elegant it was. No direct accusation, no statements I could drag into court. Just whispers through business networks, raised eyebrows, hints about instability, the suggestion that maybe Naomi Carter wasn't as solid as she looked. I thought back to Ethan accusing me of humiliating him, to Diane asking if I had lost my heart, to Victor telling me not to make enemies. And for the first time since I canceled the wedding, fear arrived cleanly. Not fear of losing Ethan. That was gone. Fear of realizing the engagement had never only been about him. I hadn't broken things off with one entitled man. I had stepped away from an entire family that treated power like inheritance. And they had finally decided I should feel what defiance costs. The whispers didn't stop. They multiplied. Not loudly. Not in ways I could screenshot or forward to a lawyer. That would have been easier, cleaner. Something I could fight head on. No, this was quieter than that. A supplier didn't return a call as quickly as usual. A long-term client started asking questions that had nothing to do with the project and everything to do with my bandwidth. A potential partner postponed a meeting indefinitely with a polite email that somehow felt like a door closing without ever being seen to close. Each instance on its own was nothing. Together they formed a pattern, and once I saw it, I couldn't unsee it. Victor wasn't attacking my company. He was softening it, making it seem just unstable enough that people would hesitate before committing. Just risky enough that they'd pull back without needing a concrete reason. It was surgical, strategic, and worst of all, plausible. I still showed up every morning in the same way. Same schedule, same tone in meetings, same calm voice, reassuring my team that everything was fine, that this was just a temporary shift in the market, that we were still solid. But at night, when the office emptied out and the silence settled in, I sat at my desk staring at spreadsheets that suddenly looked more fragile than they had a month ago. 1 pause project I could absorb. 2, maybe. But a pattern? That could bleed a company dry without ever looking like an attack. And I knew exactly who was behind it. I just couldn't prove it. That was the genius of it. That was the cruelty of it. By the time Ethan's 30 days were almost up, I was no longer just managing a breakup. I was managing fallout, real fallout, the kind that creeps into everything you built and starts asking if it can survive you, making the wrong personal decision. The move-out date was set for Friday. I made a decision early on that I wouldn't be there. Not because I was afraid of confrontation, because I understood exactly what kind of confrontation it would be. Loud, emotional, circular, designed to provoke a reaction that could later be twisted into proof of instability. I wasn't going to give them that. Instead, I asked my friend Daniel to go in my place. Daniel is the calmest person I know, the kind of man who listens twice as long as he speaks. And when he does speak, people tend to stop talking. More importantly, his father is a lawyer. Not flashy, not dramatic, just precise. I gave them a simple instruction. Her things, and only her things. I backed it up with documentation, receipts, old photos, purchase records, anything that proved ownership, because something in my gut told me this wouldn't be straightforward. I was right. The email came the night before, from Ethan, a spreadsheet attachment. Subject line, items to be collected. I opened it at my kitchen counter with a glass of water I never drank. At first, it looked almost reasonable. Clothes, shoes, toiletries, books. Then it started slipping. A television I bought 2 years before I met him. An espresso machine I had ordered during my second year in business, when I couldn't afford it but bought it anyway because I needed something in my life that felt like comfort. And then, at the very bottom of the list, 2 words, grandfather's watch. I didn't realize I had stopped breathing until my chest tightened. I read it again and again, as if the words might rearrange themselves into something less deliberate. They didn't. It was my grandfather's, a vintage Omega Seamaster from the 1960s. He wore it every day until his hands started to shake too much to fasten the clasp. After he passed, it was the only thing I kept for myself. I had it restored, carefully, respectfully, not polished into something new, but repaired so it could keep telling time. I wore it rarely. But I always knew where it was. That watch wasn't money. It wasn't status, it was memory. And Ethan knew that. I had let him wear it once. One event, one evening. One moment where I trusted him with something that mattered to me. And now it was on a spreadsheet, like a chair, like a lamp, like something you could simply list and claim. My first instinct wasn't anger, it was something colder, recognition. This wasn't confusion, this wasn't a mistake, this was a test, a line being pushed to see if I would step back or hold. I forwarded the email to Daniel and added one sentence. The watch is not his, under any circumstance. His reply came within minutes. Understood. The next day, I stayed away. I didn't check in. I didn't hover. I didn't ask for updates every 5 minutes. Because if I did, I would have driven myself insane. Instead, I tried to work. Tried being the important word. At around noon, my phone buzzed. Daniel. I answered immediately. Hey, I said. There was a pause on the other end. Not a long one, but long enough. It's happening, he said quietly. Of course it was. Tell me. They're saying you gave him the watch. I closed my eyes. Who's they? Ethan and his mother. She's backing him up, saying it was an engagement gift, a symbolic passing of family legacy. I let out a slow breath. Of course she was, because lies wrapped in emotion are harder to challenge than lies stated plainly. And your dad? I asked. Another pause. Then, calmer this time. He handled it. I leaned against the counter. How? He asked one question. What question? Do you have any documentation proving that claim? Silence stretched for a second. And? And they didn't. I almost smiled. Daniel continued. Then he stated Naomi's position, that the watch predates the relationship, that there is documentation of prior ownership, that it is not shared property, and if they want to dispute it, they can take it to small claims court. I could picture it, the shift, the moment when volume stops mattering and facts take over the room. They didn't like that, Daniel added. I'm sure they didn't. They tried to argue, got louder. Your name came up a lot, not in a good way. That didn't surprise me. What happened then? They backed down. Of course they did, because without leverage, all they had was noise. And Ethan? I asked. Daniel hesitated this time. He's angry. Angry how? Not loud anymore, just controlled. Said you think you're smarter than everyone. Said this isn't over. There it was, not over. Not because of a watch. Because I had refused to bend. Because I had forced a boundary and held it. Because I had made a decision he couldn't rewrite. Okay, I said quietly. Naomi, I'm fine. You don't sound fine. I'm not, I admitted, but I will be. He didn't push. That's the last of it, he said. They're leaving. Thank you, I said, and for everything. Always. When the call ended, I set my phone down and stood there in the quiet. The apartment felt different already, not emptier, clearer, like something heavy had finally been dragged out of it. But the silence didn't feel peaceful, it felt loaded. Because the watch had never really been about the watch. It had been about testing whether they could take something that mattered to me and convince the world it was theirs. And when that didn't work, they changed tactics. The whispers about my company, the pressure through business channels, the attempt to claim my property, the emotional manipulation. It wasn't random, it was coordinated. I walked into my bedroom and opened the drawer where I kept the watch. It was there, exactly where I had left it. I picked it up, turned it over in my hand, felt the weight of it settle into my palm. Steady, precise, unaffected. I set it back down gently. Then I stood there for a moment longer, staring at it, and something inside me shifted. Not anger, not fear, clarity. They thought I was quiet because I was passive. They thought restraint meant weakness. They thought I would keep absorbing until I broke. They were wrong. Because if there was one thing I had learned building a company from nothing, it was how to survive pressure, how to read patterns, and how to wait until a move actually mattered. I reached for my laptop, opened it, and for the first time since this started, I stopped reacting and started looking. I didn't go looking for revenge. That's the part people always get wrong. Revenge is loud, emotional, immediate. It burns fast and leaves you with something you can't control once it starts spreading. What I wanted was something steadier than that. I started where I always start when something doesn't make sense: data. Public records, business registries, court filings, the kind of information anyone can access if they're patient enough to dig and disciplined enough to read without projecting what they want to find. During the day, I ran my company like nothing was wrong. At night, I opened my laptop and went quiet. Victor Blake's company looked immaculate on the surface. Their website was polished to the point of parody. Words like integrity, community, partnership, repeated so often they stopped sounding like values and started sounding like branding. He sat on a charity board. He sponsored local events. He was exactly the kind of man people described as solid, which is why what I found didn't hit all at once. It appeared the way patterns always do, slowly. One case, then another. Then a third that looked eerily similar to the first two. I started bookmarking everything. 3 years of small claims filings. Different plaintiffs, different names, same structure, small subcontractors, electricians, painters, landscaping crews, independent vendors who had completed work and were chasing final payments. The amounts weren't huge. $5,000, $8,000, $10,000. But for a small business, that's not a minor inconvenience. That's payroll. That's rent. That's whether you can make it through the next quarter. And Victor's company showed up in those filings again and again, sometimes settling at the last minute, sometimes ignoring them until a judgment forced action, always dragging it just far enough that the other side bled first. I leaned back in my chair and stared at the screen, not shocked, not even surprised, really, just understanding. This wasn't a man who crushed people in dramatic, obvious ways. He wore them down, applied pressure where it wouldn't show, waited until they made concessions just to stop the bleeding. And suddenly, everything about the past few weeks made perfect sense. The whispers, the credit line tightening, the project that got paused. It wasn't new behavior. It was his business model, and I had become another target. I closed my eyes for a moment and let that settle. Because this wasn't a secret I had uncovered. This was a pattern that had always been there, hiding in plain sight for anyone patient enough to connect the dots, which meant something important. I didn't need to accuse him publicly. The truth already existed. It just wasn't assembled. So I opened a new document and started organizing everything. Case numbers, dates, plaintiffs, outcomes. No commentary, no interpretation, just facts. Around 2 a.m, I finally stopped, not because I was done, but because I understood enough to know that if I stepped into this the wrong way, I would look exactly like what he wanted me to look like: emotional, reactive, unstable. And he would win. Not because he was right, because he was better at controlling the narrative. The next morning, I didn't confront anyone. I didn't post anything. I didn't even respond to the handful of lingering messages still trying to pull me into conversations I no longer had the energy to manage. Instead, I started small, quiet conversations, one-on-one, people who had known me long enough to recognize when something didn't add up. I didn't show them spreadsheets. I didn't forward emails. I didn't perform. I just told the truth. He gave me an ultimatum about the prenup. He tried to claim something that belonged to my grandfather, and now there are rumors about my company that don't match reality. Then I stopped talking, because truth delivered without desperation has a weight people feel, not immediately, but consistently. Slowly, the tone of messages changed. The questions became less about my mental state and more about what had actually happened. Some people said nothing at all. They just stopped repeating the version they had been handed. That was enough. I wasn't trying to win everyone. I was just making sure I wasn't disappearing inside someone else's story. By the end of the week, I had done everything I needed to do except one thing. The part that would change the direction of all of this. I sat at my desk late Friday night, the office finally quiet, the city outside reduced to distant noise and scattered light. The document I had built over the past few days sat open in front of me. Rows of cases, names, numbers. Proof. Not explosive, not dramatic, but undeniable. I thought about sending it directly to someone, a journalist, a competitor, an investor. There were a dozen ways to push it into the open, all of them loud, all of them traceable, all of them risky. Because if I made the wrong move, it wouldn't matter that I was right. It would matter that I looked like I was retaliating. And then everything Victor had been implying about me would suddenly feel true. So I closed the document. Because this wasn't about exposing him myself. It was about letting the right people see him. That required something smaller than a public accusation. Not a spotlight, a spark. I opened a new document instead and typed carefully. No emotion, no accusations, just information. Enough to make someone ask questions. Enough to make someone look deeper. I printed it, folded it, and placed it in an envelope with no return address and no name. The destination was a small, family-run electrical company I had seen in the filings, one of the businesses that had been squeezed. I held the envelope in my hand for a moment, not hesitating, just acknowledging what it was, not revenge, a correction. I dropped it into a mailbox 2 towns over the next morning. Then I went back to work and waited. Waiting was the hardest part. Not because I doubted what I had done, because I had no control over what came next. I didn't follow up. I didn't check whether the letter had been delivered. I didn't try to track reactions or guess timelines. I went back to my routine. Work, meetings, calls, quiet dinners, early mornings. From the outside, it probably looked like I had stepped away from the entire situation. That was intentional. Because the one thing Victor understood better than most people was attention, and I wasn't going to give him mine. The conversations continued, but only where they mattered. I never over-explained, never tried to convince. I just answered when asked. He refused to sign. He gave me an ultimatum. There were other things after. That was all. No bitterness, no performance, just clarity. And slowly the ground began to shift. A friend who had stopped responding suddenly called and said, "I think I misunderstood what happened." A former client who had paused communication reached out again, casual, almost cautious, like someone testing whether the ground was still stable. No apologies, no dramatic reversals, just small corrections. That was enough, because trust doesn't rebuild in declarations. It rebuilds in behavior. Still, nothing happened on Victor's side. Not immediately. Which told me something important. He hadn't connected me to the disruption yet. Then, about 4 weeks after I sent the letter, everything changed. I was in my office early, going through emails, when one subject line caught my attention. A link. No message. Just a link from someone I hadn't spoken to in weeks. I clicked it, and there it was. A local business journal article. The headline was simple, but it hit like impact. Is a leading developer quietly squeezing small businesses? My chest went still. I opened it fully, read every line, then read it again. The article wasn't sensational. That was what made it powerful. It laid out a pattern. Multiple small claims filings. independent contractors alleging delayed or withheld payments. A sequence of cases that, individually, might look like normal disputes, but together form something harder to ignore. There were quotes from owners of small businesses who had been through the same cycle. Finish the work, wait for payment, get delayed, get ignored, settle for less just to survive. The article never accused Victor directly of anything illegal. It didn't need to. It simply laid out the pattern and let people see what it suggested. My name wasn't anywhere in it. Not once. This wasn't about me. Not on the surface, but I could feel the shift immediately, because the same ecosystem Victor had used to whisper about my company was now reading something much louder about him. By noon, the ripple had already started. A colleague forwarded me the article with a single line. "Have you seen this?" A client mentioned it casually on a call, tone neutral but observant. I guess things are shifting in the local scene. Yes, they were. Victor's power had always depended on perception, on being the stable one, the trusted one, the man people didn't question. And now he was being questioned, not attacked, not publicly dragged through some messy war, examined. And for someone like him, that was worse. I didn't celebrate, didn't react, didn't reach out to anyone, because this wasn't a victory lap. It was cause and effect catching up. Over the next 2 weeks, the fallout became clear. A charity board quietly announced that Victor had stepped down. A business contact mentioned that one of his upcoming projects had lost an investor over concerns about optics. That was the same language he had tried to use against me. Now it had turned back on him. I didn't need confirmation to know he had connected the dots. He was too experienced not to, but he couldn't prove it, just like I couldn't prove what he had done to me. And that was the balance. No direct confrontation, no public war, just consequences moving through the same channels he had chosen. As for Ethan, his world had gotten smaller. Not dramatically, but noticeably. Mutual friends stopped defending him as aggressively. The story around him softened, then thinned. I heard he was seeing someone, but the way it was said told me everything. Not admiration, not excitement. Just information, as if his life had become less central, less impressive, less worth rallying around. And his posts, because of course I saw them eventually, had changed. Still vague, still emotional, but no longer convincing. Less like a man wronged, and more like a man who couldn't understand why things hadn't gone his way. I didn't respond, didn't engage, didn't correct anything. I didn't need to. The story had already begun correcting itself. By the time everything settled, it didn't feel like a victory. That surprised me more than anything. Because if you had asked me weeks earlier what I wanted, I probably would have said justice, or closure, or even something sharper, something that sounded like vindication. But standing in my apartment again, quiet, clean, entirely mine, what I felt was something else. Relief. Not loud, not dramatic, just steady. The fallout didn't explode. It unfolded. Victor Blake didn't disappear. He didn't lose everything. Men like him rarely do, but the shift was real. His name didn't carry the same effortless weight anymore. People were more careful around him. The certainty he relied on had cracked. Ethan didn't collapse either, but something in him had changed too. The certainty was gone. That easy confidence. That assumption that things would bend around him if he pushed hard enough. For me, the cost was real. I lost a client, a significant one. The stress didn't vanish overnight. There were nights I sat at my desk long after everyone else had gone home, recalculating numbers that used to feel stable. There were mornings where I had to remind myself that just because something shook didn't mean it was falling apart. But the company held, because it was built to hold. And maybe that's the part I'm proudest of. Not what happened to Victor, not what shifted around Ethan, but what didn't collapse in me. One evening, a few months later, I found myself standing in my bedroom, the city lights low and distant through the window. I opened the drawer beside my bed. The watch was there, exactly where it had always been. I picked it up, turning it over in my hand. The weight of it was familiar, grounding, a quiet kind of certainty. It had outlasted my grandfather, outlasted years of being stored away, outlasted a relationship that almost tried to rewrite what it meant. And now it was still here, still ticking, still mine, I set it down gently, not carefully, the way you do when something is fragile, deliberately. The engagement had been a mistake, not because I loved the wrong person, but because I trusted someone who hadn't earned the level of access I gave him. That's a different kind of error, a more expensive one, but also a clearer lesson, because now I know what to look for, not charm, not comfort, not even love on its own, but alignment. Respect. The ability to stand next to someone without either of you needing to take something from the other to feel secure. I didn't win anything, not in the way people expect. I walked away with less than I thought I would have, less certainty, less illusion, less future than I had planned. But I also walked away with something intact, my work, my boundaries, my name. And in the end, that's what was still standing.